Well, thank you all so much for coming out today. Unfortunately, after my bio, I've only got 5 minutes left to talk. But as you all, I'm sure, realize, this is an incredibly important topic and one that I've kind of dedicated my professional career to addressing. So to start off, how did we get here? What happened to bring us to the problem that we have today? Well, going back, when I was in medical school, we back when we studied on parchment and clay tablets, they really believed that narcotics were very dangerous, that they were highly addicting, and that the only time you would ever use them is in a person with surgery or cancer, end-stage cancer. And as a result, at that time, there were relatively few people who were developing opioid addiction from our medications. In 1996, actually, this slide needs to be changed, the drug OxyContin was approved by the FDA, and Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which made it, undertook one of the most aggressive marketing campaigns in the history of our country. It claimed it was non-addictive due to slow release, and also cited one study that had that they claimed was a monumental earth-changing study. It turns out this study was a letter to the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine on people who were being prescribed injectable narcotics for surgery after they'd gotten through surgery. They went back and looked at them a year later, and only 1% of them had become drug addicts. That's because they were using low doses, they were being given to them, and they were often being sent home on very, very small doses of narcotics. That study was never even subjected to peer review. It wasn't published. It was just a letter to the editor. And yet, so this is something that you would use as a basis for thinking maybe we should have another larger study that actually gets published. But instead, it became the foundation upon which this entire change in our prescribing habits was predicated. And so in 1997, pain societies developed. One of these, the most prominent one, was actually heavily underwritten by Purdue Pharmaceuticals, called the American Pain Society. And they said that we should have pain as a fifth vital sign. It should be checked just like blood pressure, high blood, pulse, breathing, and it should be treated, and the consequence of treatment should be zero pain, which nobody had ever believed up to that time, but and it resulted in very aggressive pain treatment. The VA passed rules regarding aggressive pain treatment, and unfortunately we've seen in Toma what that came to. And then the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Joint Commission, which certifies hospitals, without that certification you can't bill insurance. They mandated that you had to wake people up to check their pain, that you had to get their pain down, you had to go back and recheck 15 minutes after you gave them the medicine to make sure they were better, and to aggressively use narcotics. And so hospitals that didn't do this would go bankrupt. And so this was really forced down the throats of the doctors. And by 2010, there are more deaths from prescription narcotics than from auto accidents. And now in Wisconsin, there are twice as many deaths from narcotics as from car accidents, because 80% of the people who wind up on heroin started with prescription painkillers. So the doctors really meant well. I mean, they knew the patients were suffering. They were taught that these narcotics are the best treatments for the pain. They were basing their information on what they were being told. And since then, unfortunately, we've learned that pretty much everything we know about, that we believe we know about narcotics, is actually wrong. As a result of these pressures, doctors started increasing the prescribing, and you can see here that from 1999, remember it was 1996 that OxyContin was approved. By 1999, we had this big uptick, and these are the prescriptions for opioids. These are opioid-related deaths, and you can see how closely they parallel. And then in the year 2010, another seminal event occurred. That was that OxyContin was reformulated into a pill that could not be chewed. And so now people who were used to getting 80 milligram OxyContins and taking them home and chewing them up and getting their addiction addressed couldn't do that. So they turned to the street. And because heroin is very cheap these days. The heroin is flooding the US market. There's a group called the Jalisco Boys out of western Mexico that make high-grade heroin and sell it like delivery pizza. You call them up, They meet you in a church parking lot, you do the exchange there, you don't have to go to the inner city. It's very, very quick and easy, and the prices have plummeted and potency has skyrocketed. And so we're seeing, as these people go on heroin, what happens is that from one batch to another, this batch you may need a certain amount. The next time you get it, it might be 3 times as strong, and so you die. And now there's fentanyl and carfentanil mixed in. Oxycodone is roughly 1.5 times as strong as morphine. Heroin is probably 3 to 4 times as strong. Fentanyl is 50 times as strong. Carfentanil is 10,000 to 100,000 times as strong. So it's impossible to mix it with heroin in a safe dose. So these are all consequences of this, this trend that we have had, and we've seen, Bart Starr had problems. We've seen a lot of deaths and ongoing problems with drugs at famous people. But all of these are true. I don't want to read through them all. We've got other things to talk about, but I think we can all accept that this is really a catastrophe. It's been basically a 15-year social experiment that we've done to the American people of trying to cure pain by throwing narcotics at it, and the experiment has failed. In the United States, we consume 80% of all the prescription narcotics in the world. Estimates are between 95 and 99% of all the hydrocodone in the world, and we have 5% of the world's population. And what we found, unfortunately, is that narcotics don't even work very well. By the way, the word narcotic we were supposed to stop use of that in the late 90s because they thought it was too stigmatizing to use the word narcotic because it was associated with heroin. So they wanted doctors to move to the term opioid. I like the term narcotic because I think it carries the stigma that these drugs deserve. And so I actually convinced Brad Schimmel to use that term in the Dose of Reality campaign so that people would understand what we're talking about. Most lay people aren't familiar with the term opioid. It's a term that's used mostly in the medical profession, and so. But the sad part is that from 1999 to 2013, and this is the CDC saying this, the amount of prescription painkillers prescribed in the US quadrupled, and yet there was zero impact on pain. There was no effect. And the reason is opioids are not effective when taken long term. What we know, and there have been 4 meta-analyses, so those who aren't familiar with that term, a meta-analysis is a study that goes out and finds all the studies on a particular treatment and clumps them together and analyzes them all as if they were one big study. A meta-analysis is considered God handing down tablets from on high regarding treatments. There have been 4 meta-analyses on opioids and chronic pain. All have shown that there is trivial benefit. And what we found is that the amount of benefit that is actually provided between 2 months and 6 months out is 15%. Pain patients need treatment to improve their pain by 20 to 30% to believe that they have been affected by the treatment. So the amount of benefit that opioids provide when given longer than 2 months, I think it says 6 here, I'd like to change that, but when given longer than 2 months, the amount of benefit is so trivial patients couldn't even tell it's working. What they do, on the other hand, is they stimulate the pleasure center of the brain, which rewards the behavior. So if you think, I'm in pain, and you take an opioid, and it hits the pleasure center, or the reward center, that causes you to think more frequently, I'm in pain and take an opioid. It's like when you train a dog and you give him a doggy biscuit, he does what you give him the biscuit for. Well, humans are mammals too, and when our reward systems get activated, they cause us to think that it's working. They cause us to think we're actually being rewarded for thinking we're in pain. The sad thing is there are a ton of other treatments, and I don't want to go through all of these with you because it's kind of technical. I just want you to see that there are all kinds of other treatments for pain besides narcotics, and these have actually been proven to work and are non-addicting and don't wear off with time. So, as I was saying, narcotics stimulate the reward center in the brain, the nucleus accumbens. It's dopamine, actually, is the chemical that does that. It causes a massive release of dopamine, far more than a doggy biscuit, or getting your head rubbed, like a dog. When something does this, it makes you want to do whatever caused it to happen again. And so it's like a virus. It becomes like a virus in the programming of the brain. This urge starts to take over, and it starts to shape behavior, and it starts to shape attitudes. And if it gets to the point, and not everybody has this happen, some people are far more sensitive to this than others, but in those who are very sensitive to it, it can reach the point where their willpower can no longer control it, and that's what we call addiction. So it's all a continuum. It starts as drug liking, becomes drug seeking, which then becomes drug abuse, and then becomes drug addiction, and there are two consequences: rehabilitation or death. Very, very few people with an addiction can carry that addiction without it fairly quickly resulting in one of those two things. Actually, Miles Davis is one exception. He shot heroin for 30 years, and he died of an unrelated condition. But very few of us can afford the purity of heroin and the clean needles that he had. But but there are other things that can be happening too that aren't addiction. For some people, they're just counting the minutes until their next pill. They'll take their pills on time, but they're just waiting for the time when they can take it. Some people just take it for fun. It's like going out on the weekend drinking. They'll go out and take their narcotics. That sometimes you can keep doing that, but it's very dangerous. It's like I always compare it to driving a motorcycle 80 miles an hour on a gravel road. And some people get the narcotics to sell them. Oxycodone. I think everybody here is probably familiar with oxycodone. The immediate release oxycodone is worth $1 a milligram on the street. Percocet, which has Tylenol mixed, is only worth 15 cents because people don't want to buy something that has a drug that could, if they take too much, could hurt their liver. And so a person getting Oxy-IR 30 milligram tablets 4 times a day can make $45,000 a year on the street with it. Dilaudid is actually preferred, hydromorphone, is actually preferred by heroin addicts to shoot up. It's not that good when you take it by mouth, but if you shoot it up, they actually like it better than heroin. So my question is, why is Dilaudid not Schedule I like heroin is? Of the two, heroin's probably safer if you were getting it pharmaceutical grade. That's worth 15 milligrams, $15 a milligram on the street. I hope I'm not giving anybody ideas here. So what leads to addiction then? What is the difference between somebody who takes a few of these pills after a knee surgery and then decides to stop it, and somebody who finds them getting their claws in them and losing control? Well, it depends on two different things. It's the person and the medicine. And there are many things that shape addictive risk. Probably the most important is genetic. Some people are just born prone to abuse of narcotics. And it seems like different people are predisposed to different things. There's some people that are really sensitive to alcohol. Native Americans have a problem with that, and it was used against them by the settlers as they came west in the American military back in the 1800s. But for some people it's narcotics, for some people it's cocaine. It seems to vary from person to person. Psychological factors make a big difference because these drugs take away pain, they also take away emotional pain. And so people who are suffering, somebody who's been abused in their childhood or suffered some profound trauma is very prone to get addicted to these. That's why it's such an issue with veterans, because so many of them carry a lot of emotional trauma from their time of service. And we really need more institutional support to help them work through that so they don't fall prey to these things. Being around other people who are doing drugs, it destigmatizes it, makes it easier for people to consider trying it. And then how bad your life is. So it can be internal pain or it can be external pain. If you're living in an environment that's really dangerous, your kids can't go outside without you getting in fear of them getting shot. Your house is really not, it's winter and your house isn't well heated. And if you have a lot of things that are bothering you in your life, that can play a role too. And then on the other side is the drug and how addictive the drug is. Different drugs have different levels of reward that they cause. We use methadone to treat heroin addicts because it has a very low amount of reward. Heroin addicts don't particularly like the way the stuff affects them. And so they aren't as prone to overusing it as they would if they were getting heroin or oxycodone or something like that. How fast the drug kicks in, the quicker the effect after the behavior, the stronger the impact on changing future behavior. So if you're prone to addiction to marijuana, for example, and you eat marijuana, it will kick in very slowly over a couple hours. Oftentimes you don't even realize that it's happening. If you smoke it, it kicks in a couple minutes. And so sometimes, a few 30 to 60 seconds. And so that really impacts your tendency to use it again. So shooting up a drug or inhaling it is really snorting is a little slower, but still pretty fast. Taking a pill is not as fast, but short-acting or immediate release pills are certainly a bigger problem than slow release pills, but people can still have problems with slow release pills as well. How fast it's eliminated, this is the problem with cocaine. A cocaine user is flying high and suddenly they just crash, and it creates this feeling of intense deprivation, and they feel the need to get it back again. Things that bring you down really slowly doesn't create that problem as much. And so, and also short-acting medicines tend to reward pill taking. People start seeking pills more, whereas long-acting medicines tend to have a constant blood level, so you don't really notice a change. So I like to make the analogy of lighting a fire. The patients like the wood. Some are dry tinder and some are wet wood. And the narcotic is like the flame. Some are very stimulating to the reward system. Some have very weak effect on the reward system. So some are kind of like cigarette butts, lit cigarette butts, which if you flick them into dry tinder, they will start a fire, but if you drop it on a wet log, it won't. I like to think of oxycodone and hydromorphone or Dilaudid as butane torches. And so they will start even fairly wet wood. So if you have a large population, let's say I'm a doctor and I have a lot of pain patients and I give them a high euphoria opioid, I'm going to have a substantial number of those who will be sensitive enough to that they'll become addicted. If I give them all low euphoria opioids, there may be a few that are very, very sensitive, but most will be safe. And so I think the key is for us as physicians to use less euphoric opioids and be very careful about how much and how we dose them. This is a totally anecdotal. This is my experience. I've created this. I've humbly called it the Mcnett Scale, but it gives a sense of. And what I find is I can always put patients on more euphoric opioids. It's very hard to switch them from a more euphoric opioid to a less euphoric opioid. Oftentimes what they'll find is they'll come in and complain of many side effects that are all very rare. I've even had some people come in and complain of something like something they read on the handout from the pharmacy, like dysphoria. And they didn't even know what it meant. Dysphoria actually means just makes you feel bad, sort of out of sorts. And so they'll say, well, I had dysphoria. I said, well, how was that for you? Well, it was dysphoria. And I said, well, different people have different kinds of dysphoria. What kind did you have? Can you explain it? Oh, you're a jerk. And get up and stomp out. So there are some, buprenorphine is the stuff that's in Suboxone that's used to treat people for addiction, actually. But it can also work for pain. Tapentadol is a very low euphoria but potent medicine. It's very similar in structure to tramadol or Ultram. I think some of you may be familiar with that. These are injectables that are very low euphoria. Methadone is down here, and then in the middle range you get the hydrocodone, codeine like Tylenol 3, morphine. And then you get to the ones that are heavily abused, oxycodone, oxymorphone, which is also known as Opana, and the IV hydromorphone. Demerol is this one, and then heroin. So I'm trying to do a lot of teaching in Aurora too, and throughout the state. Actually, I've developed continuing education programs for physicians to help them understand the value of choosing medicines that are more in this range. So how can you tell if there's a problem? You have a loved one and you're worried about them. If they're taking more than they're prescribed, that's a problem. They never should do that. That's how you get kicked off of opioid prescribing. Most patients in this state have a pain contract or agreement with their doctor. One thing it stipulates very strongly is they can't do that. And if you have a friend or relative who you know is doing that, I would recommend you call their doctor and let them know. If they're taking them even when you know they're not in pain, getting pain pills from more than one doctor at the same time. Now, some people, they switch doctors, or they have a doctor and they go to the emergency room because they hurt themselves. That's not necessarily a problem. But if they're going to 2 or 3 doctors and getting a month's prescription from each of them, that is a serious problem. Constantly needing more and more, constantly thinking or talking about their drugs, taking so much that they're stoned or drowsy and slurred speech. If they're using other illegal drugs like marijuana or cocaine, and then finally if they overdose. Overdose is a signal that narcotics represent a direct and imminent threat to patients, and they need to be stopped from their narcotics if that happens. Because if they survive one overdose, they may not survive the next one. Signs of a problem with heroin: sudden dramatic change in personality. Money is like, they're like a gaping maw that just sucks up all the money for their habit. They start not taking care of themselves very much. They start getting in trouble with the law. Men tend to do more stealing and dealing of drugs. Women tend to do more prostitution, but you can see both on both sides. And then track marks, these are track marks and what they look like. Redness and irritation over veins, usually lots of little spots along the course of the vein. Although some people are very good at hiding it. Some people will shoot up between their toes so that they conceal it under the tongue. I've had some people, some men that had ruined every vein in their body and actually wound up shooting up in their penis. It's really sad. So how do you treat it? Okay, we've got the problem. It's there. I'm working to stop doctors from creating the problem by using more sensible approaches to pain management, but there are people who are too late. It's already created. They're already out of the box, and so if it's early, some people may just quit. It's not like some people that are developing a problem with their drinking, they can just quit. They don't have to go to AA. They just quit and they're okay. Going to treatment, however, tends to make it more likely they won't relapse. If they try to quit but they can't, then they need help. And you can get it by calling 211. They can refer them to a treatment center. The Suboxone website has a list. You can go in there and they actually have a map of people who prescribe Suboxone with little bubbles over the top, and you can click on the bubble and you get all their information. You can go in and do Wisconsin Opiate Treatment Locator in Google, or Narcotic Treatment Locator, and you will get links to sites that have more comprehensive. Suboxone is just for people prescribing Suboxone, which is buprenorphine, and plus some naloxone added to it so that they can't get high by shooting it up. But there are other forms of treatment as well. There's a long-acting Narcan called Vivitrol. Actually, it's naltrexone. And it's like you take a shot of this, and for 30 days, even if you use, you get no effect. There's another form of treatment, methadone centers. Those tend to be the most intense treatment centers. You live at the site a lot of the time, or at least at the start. And so your doctor may be able to refer you to a treatment site, and you can always call NA or AA and get help. There are other community self-help groups as well that you can call. The bottom line is that people who've gotten to this point, they can't just quit. They have to change their life. Because by the time you get this addicted, the addiction is like the pillar around which a person's entire life is rotating. They are spending almost all their time either getting high or figuring out how they're going to get high, how they're going to get the money to get high. It is like a black hole, and they are a planet that's spinning down into it. In order to get this out of their system, they have to completely change their life. They have to find new ways of finding pleasure in their life. They oftentimes have to change their friends. They have to change the kind of music they listen to, the kind of TV they watch, the way they dress. It requires like just a complete overhaul. And that generally takes, for a person who's got serious addiction, it usually takes about 3 years or more, depending on how aggressive they're working their program. When I quit smoking, it was 7 years before I could watch somebody light up a cigarette and not feel a pang of desire to do it myself. And unfortunately, right now, most narcotic treatment centers in Wisconsin are full. We have an initiative in Aurora. We're working with the primary care group and with the addiction treatment centers to try to expand prescribing throughout the entire state. or at least throughout Aurora's entire area in the state. It is still in the process of being developed, but it's going to be presented to the Physician Compensation Committee soon, I'm hoping. And so hopefully within the next 4 to 6 months, we'll start seeing quite a bit more availability of centers. But right now, it's really, there are waiting lists. And unfortunately, the sad part is the way that addiction works, you have the craving, it's running your life. It's like the virus is in control of the program, and it's in control of the computer. And it requires a tremendous amount of suffering to break that. They call it hitting bottom in addiction circles. And when you hit bottom, you have what's called a window of sobriety, or a window of clarity, where the core program, the person's core personality kind of rises up, and it says, oh my gosh, what am I doing to my life? And that's the time when they can actually get into treatment. But that window will close. And so the wait time that we have for addiction treatment services in Wisconsin is a real problem, because sometimes by the time their intake is scheduled, they're not in that window anymore, and they're back to using. So the sooner we can get all of these going, the better it is. But I do think with persevering in this, it's often possible to find some place that your friend or loved one, or you, if you've got the problem, can get into. This addiction doesn't happen in isolation. It affects everybody that cares about the addict. And so there are services available also for families. Al-Anon and Alateen are probably the longest lived services, but there are other community services too that work with the families. But families need help. They need to learn how they can support their loved one without enabling them. And that's a really critical problem to learn, because and so you can go to these sites and you develop people you can talk to. You can see how other people have dealt with their families and what they have learned from their own problems, and so that you don't have to learn it all over yourself. You can emulate some of these other people. They can help organize a family intervention possibly, so that you can address, confront the person that has the problem and try to get them to seek help. And then there's also Alateen for teenagers with an addicted parent or loved one. And as I said, you have to hit bottom. Addicts have to wake up from the addiction, basically. And for most, their life has to get absolutely horrible. Unfortunately, for some, the amount of misery they have to suffer is worse than what they're willing to tolerate without committing suicide. And I am confident that many of the narcotic overdose deaths that we see are actually suicides. Sometimes they'll say they want to quit, but have not quit, but haven't really yet hit bottom, and they will certainly relapse. Actually, relapse is part of the natural course of addiction. It's part of the disease. They get better, they relapse. They go back, they work harder, they may relapse again. It's almost expected. You hate to have to expect it, but it does happen very commonly, and it doesn't mean they can't get better. It means that they've just had a backslide, and that they need more support and sometimes more intervention from the addiction treatment center. Maybe they have to go there more often. Maybe they have to go to more meetings, community self-help meetings. I know AA actually advocates 60 meetings in 60 days when you first get involved. But some people haven't been going that much, and they need to up how many meetings they go to. So, but you can overcome the relapses. But hitting bottom actually causes them to be willing to do anything. As I mentioned, they have to change virtually everything in their life. But with motivation and support, it is possible to overcome. These are the various types of treatment. You have the abstinence-based treatments. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, a number of community support groups also support abstinence-based treatment. AA and NA used to have problems with people who are on Suboxone or methadone. I think most groups are getting more tolerant of it now. And so methadone is covered by public aid. Actually, buprenorphine is also covered by public aid, I believe, in Wisconsin at this time. And then the naltrexone I mentioned, the month-long injection, but that's quite expensive and hard to get. But these are not the answer. These keep people from abusing drugs. They keep them alive long enough to get the help they need with the behavioral part of it. and learning how to reshape their life around something other than drugs. But it helps, they are much more likely to get in recovery and stay in recovery if they have these medications to help them than if they're just trying to do it on their own. And so it's about 3 times as likely to be successful if they use those medicines. And as I said, effective treatment takes years. So what can you do as a person? Take action. Don't enable the addicted person. You know, buying a person an apartment, that's just one less expense they have so that they can take the money out and get drugs. If you let them come into your house, take great care to make sure that you don't leave cash around, or that what you want is for any intervention you do to be something that spurs them to get more help. So rather than buying them a car, offer to drive them to their meetings. You know, do things like that. Make sure you keep your pills safe if you have any pills. I really advocate a fire safe. They work very well. Keep it in a fire safe and hide the keys someplace that they won't find it, like in the inside pocket of a jacket in your closet or something like that. Count your pills every few months and make sure that the right number is there. Ask your doctor if non-narcotics are available, and I advocate that anyway. If you have any pain problems, ask your doctor if a non-narcotic medicine could be used. And then dispose of the pills that you don't need anymore. And there are lots of pill take-back programs going on these days. Community organizations can encourage participation in drug take-back days, encourage having naloxone available in the homes in case of overdose. Report pill mills. If you know of a pill mill, if you know that your loved one is getting your medicine from some doctor and they're getting outrageous amounts of narcotics, report that to the police or to the state licensing board. Encourage questions to prescribers. Is there a non-narcotic medicine I could try instead? Is this the least narcotic medicine that I could have? Do I really need this many pills? I had a knee surgery. I got 40 Percocet. I took half of one. Okay, trained speakers on narcotics, addiction, and pain treatment for schools, church, and community programs, covering all of these things. And I think this is really important, is destigmatizing addiction. Addiction is not a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. It is, it is mostly genetic and a result of the pain that somebody has suffered over their lives and carries unresolved. Those are the things that make them highly prone to this. You know, certain psychiatric disorders, bipolar disease, ADD, make people much more sensitive. It appears that it's the wiring in these patients. And so it's not about being a bad person. And I really like that virus in the programming analogy. You don't hate a computer because it got a computer virus. You don't cuss at it. You might, well, maybe you might, but it's not a sign that there's anything wrong with the computer, is the point. It just got a virus, and it needs Norton or rehab, okay? And that's the answer to that. Understanding the signs of addiction, as I mentioned, helping people understand how to get treatment, and then developing intervention resources to help people when they are willing. That's my talk. Thank you very much.